hay 35 personnes, il y a 35 personnes connectées sur les webcasts. Alors, il sera bien de le considérer. Mais en Mexique, la lingua franca académique, l'anglais, c'est accepté. Si pas totalement dominé, mais je crois qu'on aura agilité, creo que le daremos agilidad a la presentación haciéndola en inglés. El texto de las láminas está preparado en español, el texto de la presentación en español. Possibly that will work the best for all. De plus, mon français est exécrable. Non, quand bon, se me en profondité, c'est pas trop bon. Alors, voy a preguntarnos una alternativa diferente ahora, que es algunas consideraciones acerca de Internet y la educación que van a tener impacto sobre los medios y la convergencia. Voy a tratar de cumplir con los tiempos que me... I'm sorry, I'm going to speak in English. I'm going to try to stay within the time allotted by Rocio. That's another good reason to speak only once, deliver the speech only once instead of twice. And I'll try to look at this from a complementary perspective to the excellent introduction and setting that Professor Kijandu has made already. I'll start looking at the principles with which we have built Internet, touch a little bit on Internet governance, then move on to convergence, disruption, and then look at education in general, and some considerations about the universities. I'm particularly glad that among the audience I can recognize several well-known academics of UNAM and people with lots of interest in this field, and Professor Judith Subieta, who's the coordinator of Open University and Distance Education for UNAM, who has been developing an enormous task of opening windows to a university and providing media transformations that take the university outwards in many ways that the rest of the university still has as a blind spot, and I will touch on that particularly close to the end. So how have we built the Internet? It's often forgotten. A friend of mine and colleague at work, Eric Huesca, and I have been observing recently that what we think that people think or know about the Internet is very far from the reality, and people have now assumed that the Internet is a utility, and they don't know some very basic facts and principles about it. Even from some of them have become philosophical while they started from the as technical design principles. And on the other hand, people really believe that there's a huge server out there where everything lies. Confuse the domain name system service with the actual delivery of information and stuff like that, which really make them incompetent to properly use the Internet, especially if we are going to move more to the prosumer kind. I hate buzzwords, but I will have to use them as a sort of a shorthand, as taquigrafía. But if we are going to think of a prosumer, of a producer and consumer, who's maybe producing only some tweets and cat pictures on Facebook, it still is content production. And if you go to the semiotics, of course, it's a lot more than just cat pictures. It tells you that this person's mind is filled with cat pictures. So you already have a picture of that. So the basic points about the Internet are philosophical. Let's say that the engineering design principles that became philosophy are interoperability, openness, and a layer architecture, packet switching, a principle called end-to-end, which is read naively as meaning that anything that you inject into the Internet on one end of the communications must appear at the other end. Actually, the end-to-end principle is a little bit more elaborate, and it means a lot even politically, as I will explain. The end-to-end principle means that if you want something that happens on one end to have some control of how it appears at the other end, let's say if you produce some content or services and you want them to be delivered in a certain way, let's say, for example, completeness of the information, no packet loss, or encryption, image resolution. You should not program the internet itself, the network itself, to take care of that. You have to take care of that at the end, which means that the layers principle, in turn, carries only information, only packets and routing at the lower layers. And it's in the upper layers where you will have to ensure that the application at the receiving end is doing bit checks, checksums, uh, or decryption, or ensuring the integrity of the messages received. In fact, the genius of the internet was to separate the traffic control from the traffic itself, so that you don't always need traffic control. You don't always need the TCP protocol running over the IP protocol. You can have, for example, video like we're using right now for the webcast. That can be transmitted over UDP instead of over TCP. And that means that the user will accept some level of packet loss because the computer itself can reconstruct the images from the pixelation and tolerate some pixelation or some freezing or some delay. This is very important because it translates into the principle that says that the network has to be dumb, and it's the edge that is smart. The intelligence is on the edge. And of course, this doesn't mean that the engineers that programmed or designed the routers and the switches are dumb. It means that they have only to concentrate on passing the information along by the fastest and best routes possible to be rebuilt at the edge, whereas all the processing and the design of the information treatment is at the edge. This is a very important principle. Together with the best effort principle, you don't guarantee anything on the internet. Internet routers, computers are going to be working at the best they can do with the effort available. They will not guarantee 100% delivery. They will not guarantee delay times of less than 10 milliseconds. All that is soluble by adding more power to more bandwidth, but it's a best effort. That has given rise to the most important consequence of the internet, which is permissionless innovation. But a very quick representation of this in order to move forward. When I was a child, and definitely was a child before anyone was there, any one of you was there. When I was a child, when many of us were children here, some of you had this on a second or third reciting. The image of the future was the Supersonico family, was the, I don't remember the English name, this was a cartoon by Hanna-Barbera, where a family of the future was depicted, and the future was depicted by everyday drama stays the same. Jealousy, children that are unruly, parents that don't completely agree, all that stayed the absolute same. The future was hopeless for humankind, but the media was different. So you would have jetpacks to go promptly from work without taking a car or the subway, and you would have video conferencing, you telephone calls. The image of the future that made our eyes wide open was that you would call your mother and there would be a picture in a television. By right now, well, that never happened with the telephone companies because they would have to modify the whole network. The network would have to be smart. Switches would have to be video switches, and they would have to carry video telephones, and the radio telephones would have to be sold by the same companies. What happens on the internet now is that we did it differently. So we had Skype and many other ways of doing teleconferencing. And actually now, these things are decentralized. They don't have to ask permission from anybody to operate, to be designed or operated or installed. And now, in fact, video has become so much of a commodity that it's actually a nuisance. Our dream of having your mother, when you call her, looking at you on the screen has become something that, I have a tape on the camera in my computer in order to avoid malware taking over and looking at me, myself, picking my nose. And I don't talk to my mother because she's been dead for 50 years, but I talked to several other people, and we immediately suppress the video because it's a nuisance, and you don't want your mother to be watching the many other things that you do while you act like you were talking to her. This is the power of permissionless innovation, and it's due to all these principles. The consequences of these principles have been analyzed in many ways. One that's particularly useful are the 6 Ds of John C. Lee Brown and Paul DeWitt, which are the demassification, decentralization, denationalization, despatialization, disintermediation, and disaggregation. These things were analyzed by them about 10 years ago, and it didn't actually work completely that way. Let's say we don't have a complete absence of intermediaries on the internet, but we have new intermediaries which have to gain their lives, earn their lives every day. So yeah, you can buy books directly from the printers, and you can actually don't even need the printer because you can download it immediately after you pay in a digital form. But you better do it from Amazon than having an account with every publisher. So the new intermediary discovered that their business, that their knowledge was not selling books, but actually managing logistics and centralizing payments. And people in the US are even buying their everyday groceries from Amazon, and it's delivering in 2 hours in cities like New York. So that changed completely the markets. And that gives rise to something that Clayton Christensen has called the disruption. And disruption is a model that I will come back to, but basically it says, some businesses have or markets have been completely transformed because a company did something that users needed and existing companies didn't evolve fast enough to do it. So there was a complete crash of that market. We assume internet as an infrastructure. We assume internet as an utensil, as you mentioned it, as an util, something that's already built, something that's always available, ubiquitous, and closer to invisible every day. We attribute to the internet, therefore, all the goods, universality, horizontality, reach, collaboration. It has become the public square, it has become the Habermasian public sphere, and we assume that we can escape central control, we can escape Big Brother on the internet. Actually, what we have is a problem with little brothers. We attribute to the internet also now all evils, which is right because the internet is a mirror of humankind more and more. The more humans take to the internet, the more that all our conduct will be reflected and carried over the internet. So we also attribute all the evils. There are all these moral panics about the internet, about distraction, insecurity, crime. We have some real issues with hate speech propagation that becomes a form of censorship. And it's actually now the worst. In a perverse way, sometimes you can say that speech is the worst enemy of speech, because hate speech becomes the worst enemy of free speech. People will just not go into some spaces and express their ideas because they will be bullied and even physically threatened. The most recent massive case being the Gamergate, where women have been chased away completely from the game development and are having a hard time fighting back for this, even physical security. We can attribute to the internet polarization, permanent surveillance and wiretapping, and a total new form of control. And all these things are true, both the goods and the bads. They are competing against each other. This is just one more stage in the epic fight between good and evil in humankind, if you like to look at things in this Manichaean way, with just the dynamics of humankind accelerated, as Professor Tizandu has already mentioned. So we have a big question, which is, where's the fight? Who is in charge? Who can I go and tell? Who's the general director? Who's the president of the internet? So I can tell him, there's this guy bullying this person, and I'm getting too much hate speech and spam, and I can't communicate effectively like I did previously. Well, good luck finding the president. The internet governance is completely decentralized. It's taken place by the intervention of all possible stakeholders, academics, technologists, citizens, governments, private companies. It's multipolar, where there's no single government, because there's one way to deal with spam, a different way to deal with phishing, many different ways of dealing with intellectual property, and we have both the people who want to kick you off the internet for downloading a song for your child's party, and the people who are moving for open access. Speaking in a university, this is particularly interesting because we are in the middle. We are completely schizophrenic in that we, on one hand, want complete open access for our students and professors to every bit of information that exists in the world, cost-free and immediately, because it's a need. It's the most important input for the knowledge production. That's our responsibility. And on the other hand, professors are very skittish about not having one word of theirs being republished in the world, which is ridiculous in my view, because a good academic will always have to think that your best work is still to come, and it will be better if your previous work has been shared and you get all the input and feedback from that. But attitudes are attitudes, and we also have lawyers at the universities, and they are driven by a big principle. There would be letters, golden letters all over this room if this were a law office that say CYA, which is cover your ass, which is never run a risk, especially for the university. So there's no one word published, no one video published by the university. We haven't signed releases on all our intellectual production. I expect that all of us will have to sign on something before we leave this room because we have already been shared over the internet. This internet governance stuff may sound old, especially even at the technical standards level, but to have evolutions like HTML5, which are changing our life right now,